Trelawney, Dr. Livesey, and the rest of these gentlemen, having asked me to write down the whole particulars about Treasure Island, from the beginning to the end, keeping nothing back but the bearings of the island, and that only because there's still treasure not yet lifted, I, Jim Hawkins, take up my pen and go back many years to the time when I was a lad, when my father kept the Admiral Benbow Inn, and the brown old seaman with the saber cut first took up his lodging under our roof.
15 men on the dead man's chest. Yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil had done for the rest. Yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum.
I remember him as if it were yesterday, as he stood before the inn door. His song and his laugh I shall never forget. He was a tall, strong, heavy, nut brown man, and on one shoulder he carried his great sea chest. His tarry pigtail fell across his soiled blue coat. His hands were ragged and scarred, his nails black and dirty. Across one cheek was the saber scar, a dirty, livid white. He looked around the cove, whistling to himself, his gaze taking in the tall cliffs, the beach, and the tricky rocks at the entrance. Then he turned, marched into the inn, and slammed the door behind him. He sat down in the parlour and called roughly for a glass of rum, which my father soon brought him.
Well, this is a mighty pleasant place, a mighty pleasant grog shop. Much company, mate?
My father told him no, very little company. The more was the pity.
Ah, then, this is the berth for me. I'll stay here a bit. Rum and eggs and bacon is what I want, and that head up there for to watch ships off. And what might you call me? You might call me Captain.
And then he threw down 4 gold pieces on the rough table.
Tell me when I've worked through that, matey.
And he sat back, looking as fierce as a commander. And that was all we knew of our guest. Obviously, he was a seafaring man. But where had he come from? What was his name? And why had he chosen our remote inn as his place of residence? He seemed a very lonely man. All day long, he'd sit upon the cliff top, humming to himself, with a brass telescope at hand that he might study the passing ships. In the evenings, he'd sit in a corner of the parlour next the fire and drink rum and water, very strong. He would not speak when spoken to, and eyed with great suspicion any stranger that entered the room. One night, he let me into his secret.
Keep your eye open, lad, for a seafaring man with one leg, and let me know the minute he appears.
He held on tight to my shirt, his scarred face close to mine, his foul breath telling of the rum. In his palm lay a silver 4-penny piece.
There's one of those every month, lad, if you keep a watch out.
The seafaring man with one leg. What a personage that conjured up in my mind. But it was wise that the captain asked me to look out for him, for there were many nights when he was too far gone in rum to notice any stranger. He would laugh and sing and tell those stories that frightened people worst of all. Dreadful stories they were, about hanging and walking the plank, and storms at sea, about wild deeds and places on the Spanish Main. The weeks turned into months, and still the captain stayed, so that the money he'd paid us had long been exhausted, and my father never plucked up the heart to ask for more. He was only once crossed, and that was towards the end, when my poor father was far gone in a decline that took him off. Dr. Livesey came late that afternoon to see the patient, and afterwards in the parlour told me of my father's condition. At the same time, the drunken captain was holding forth to an attentive audience who knew better than to cross him, and he became furious that the doctor should continue to ignore him.
Silence there between decks!
If you were addressing me, sir, I have only one thing to say to you. If you keep on drinking rum, the world will soon be quit of a very dirty scoundrel. The captain sprang to his feet in a terrible fury, in his hand a sailor's clasp knife. Slowly he advanced on Dr. Livesey, threatening to pin him to the wall. The doctor never so much as moved. "If you don't put that knife away this instant, I promise you upon my honor that you shall hang at the next assizes." The captain glared for a moment, then knuckled under, and putting away his knife, he resumed his seat, grumbling like a beaten dog. "And now, sir, since I know there's such a fellow in my district, you may count I'll have me eye on you by day and night. I'm not a doctor only, I'm a magistrate, and if there's the breath of a complaint against you, I'll have you hunted down. Let that suffice." The captain was a quiet man that evening, and for many evenings to come. And so the winter came, with bleak cold weather and long hard frosts, a time when my father sank daily, and my mother and I had all the inn upon our hands. It was one January morning, when the cove was grey with hoarfrost, and the sun still low and touching only the hilltops, that the captain arose earlier than usual and set out down the beach. He had his telescope under one arm, his hat tilted back upon his head, and his breath hung like smoke in his wake as he strode off. I was laying the breakfast table against his return when the parlour door opened, and a man stepped in whom I had never seen before. He was a pale, tallowy creature, wanting 2 fingers of the left hand, and though he wore a cutlass, he did not look much like a fighter. "Hello, sonny," he said. "Is this here table for my mate Bill?" I told him I knew of no Bill, and that the table was for a person who stayed in our house, whom we called the captain. "Ha, ha, ha, ha! Well, my mate Bill will be called the captain like as not. He has a cut on one cheek, and a mighty pleasant way with him, particularly in drink. Does that fit your captain?" I nodded, and the stranger smiled, an evil smile. "Well, I told you so, sonny. Now tell me, my mate Bill, where might he be now?" I told him that the captain was out walking, but likely to return shortly for his breakfast. "Well, ain't that nice? This'll be as good as drink to my mate Bill. I think I'll wait for him, and we'll give him a little surprise, bless his heart." Though it was no affair of mine, I felt I should warn the captain of his visitor, and made for the door. "Come here, boy." The most horrible change had come over the stranger's tallowy face. He leaned forward at me, glaring with bloodshot eyes, his face set in an angry scowl. "Now, don't go and spoil my little surprise, will you, eh?" And with that he sat in a chair behind the door, keeping me out of sight behind him. Within minutes, footsteps heralded the captain's return. We heard him walking up the path, then through the open doorway and across the room. It was then that the stranger slammed shut the door. The captain spun on his heel and fronted us. He went quite white, and had the look of a man who sees a ghost, and, 'pon my word, I felt sorry to see him turn so sick. "Come, Bill, you know me. You know an old shipmate, surely." "Black Dog. And who else, Bill? Black Dog as ever was, come to see his old shipmate Billy Bones at the Admiral Benbow Inn. Oh, Bill, we've seen a sight of times, us two. Let's have a glass of rum together, and we'll sit down and talk like old shipmates." I was then made to leave the room, that they might talk in secret. And though I did my best to listen, I could hear nothing but a low gabbling. After a while, the voices began to grow higher, and I could pick up a word or two, but mostly oaths. Then the captain called out, No, at an end of it. If it comes to swing in, swing all, say I." And with that there was a tremendous explosion of oaths and other noises. The chair and the table went over. A clash of steel followed, and then the scream of pain. The next instant, I saw Black Dog in full flight, the blood streaming from his shoulder, while the captain stood shaken and out of breath at the door of the inn. He called to me, Jim, lad, bring me some rum, quick, and then I must get away from here." But even as he called, he swayed on his feet, clutched at the door, and with a great gasp collapsed full length on the floor. Such was the captain's condition that Dr. Livesey was summoned immediately. He arrived within the hour, and having examined the unconscious captain, declared that he would live. "He's not been wounded, Jim," he remarked. "The man has suffered a stroke, as I warned him. Now keep him quiet and away from the rum bottle, and all should be well." There then followed a most dreadful chapter in my life, when suffering and death were all around me. For the captain was not the only sick man at our inn. My poor father now was dying. The doctor gave what help he could. My mother sat with him day and night. But all we could do was comfort him to the end. And the end soon came. For the following day, my father passed away. It was undoubtedly the saddest moment of my life. This unhappy event put all other matters on one side. Our natural distress, the visits of the neighbors, the arranging of the funeral, and all the work of the inn had to be carried on, and I had little time to think of other things. It was the day after my father's funeral, however, when I took a tray of food to the captain, that he suddenly grabbed my arm.
Jim boy, tell me how long I've been laid out here."
When I told him he'd been there for 4 days, his face went white.
4 days? Then they'll have the black spot on me at any moment. Oh, Jim, I beseech you, boy, fetch me a glass of rum. I need it now as I've never needed it. But the doctors is all swabs. And what do they know about seafaring men? I've lived my life on rum and I must have it now. Look, Jim, look how my fingers fidget. If I don't have a drain of rum, I'll have the horrors. I've seen some already. I'll give you a golden guinea for a noggin, Jim. I want none of your money, Captain. Only that which you owed my father. I'll get you 1 glass, no more. I returned with the rum straight away, and looked on as he drank it in a single gulp. Then he lay back, the glass in one hand, my wrist in the other, and despite his general weakness, there was still much strength in his grip. "Now, Jim, listen to me. I'm deserted by all bar you, it seems. You're the only one here that's worth anything, so I'll let you into a secret. That seafaring man who was here." "You mean Black Dog?" "Aye, Black Dog. He's a bad un. But there's worse that put him on, and soon they'll put the black spot on me." "But what is the black spot, Captain?" "It's a summons, mate, a summons. Now, if I can't get away and they tip me the black spot, then I tell you, Jim, it's me old sea chest they're after."
I looked towards the chest in one corner of the room. It was the one he'd carried on his shoulder when he first arrived at the inn.
"I'm the only one that knows the place, Jim. I was Flint's first mate, and he gave it to me as he lay a-dying. Now the secret's in the chest. If they come, lad, if they come, then you ride and tell the doctor, and tell him to bring help, and he'll catch 'em all that's left of Flint's old crew."
And with that, the captain released his grip on my arm. He lay back very weak and fell into a heavy sleep. I left the captain sleeping that afternoon and walked along the cliffs. It was bitterly cold, with a still mist that hovered above the ground and deadened the roar of the great breakers. I was in low spirits, saddened at my father's death, but also curious about the black spot and the secret that was locked in the captain's sea chest. In the gloom of early evening, I slowly returned to the inn, and as I drew near, I noticed someone approaching along the road. He was plainly blind, for he tapped before him with a stick and wore a great green shade over his eyes and nose. He was hunched as if with age or weakness, and wore a huge old tattered sea cloak with a hood that made him positively deformed. I never saw in my life a more dreadful-looking figure. He stopped a little from the inn, and then addressed the air in front of him.
"Will any kind friend inform a poor blind man who's lost the sight of his eyes in what part of the land he may now be?
"You're at the Admiral Benbow, Black Hill Cove, my good man," said I. "I hear a young voice. Give me your hand, friend, and lead me in." I held out my hand, and the horrible, soft-spoken, eyeless creature gripped it in a moment like a vice. I struggled to break free, but with a single action the blind man pulled me close to him.
"Now, boy, take me to the captain."
"Sir, I must not."
"Yes, take me to him, boy, or I'll break your arm."
And so great was the pain of his grasp that I did as I was told. In through the door I led him, through the parlour and up the stairs to the room where the captain lay. Slowly I pushed open the door, and we entered the room. The captain lay asleep as I had left him. Then he stirred, and as he opened his eyes and saw the blind man standing at the doorway, there came upon his face a look of absolute terror. We moved towards him.
"Blind Pew!"
He seemed unable to move, caught in a paralysis of fear as the blind man moved close to him.
"Now, boy, take his right hand by the wrist and bring it near to my right."
I did as I was told, and saw something pass into the captain's palm.
"And now that's done,"
said the blind man. And at the words he let hold of me, and with incredible accuracy and nimbleness skipped out of the room, down the stairs and out onto the road. As I stood motionless, I heard his stick go tap, tap, tapping into the distance. I looked down at the captain. He'd regained himself somewhat and was sitting on the bed, looking down into his palm.
10 o'clock. There's 6 hours to go. We'll do it.
The captain put his hand to his throat and then fell back upon the bed. I went to him at once, but all haste was in vain. The captain was dead. True, I had never liked him, though of late I had begun to pity him. My poor mother was as much distressed as I when I told her. I told her also of Blind Pew, the black spot, and the secret in the chest. "Whatever the secret is, Mother, we've little time to find it. No doubt Blind Pew will return, and how many others with him?" My poor mother kept marvellous calm. "We must open the chest then," she said, and boldly she led the way upstairs. I took the key from round the captain's neck, and soon we had the chest open. A strong smell of tobacco and tar rose from the interior, where, under a suit of clothes, the miscellany began. A quadrant, a tin cannikin, several stocks of tobacco, 2 handsome pistols, an old Spanish watch, and a mass of trinkets and shells. At the bottom we found 2 bundles, one wrapped in oilcloth and looking like papers, the other a canvas bag that gave forth at a touch the jingle of gold. And then, as we opened the bag of gold that was filled with a variety of coins, I heard again that sound, the tap, tap, tap of Blind Pew's stick, and in the background the murmur of voices. "Quick, Mother," I whispered. "They're here, and sooner than we thought. We must away. Take all the money." "I'll show these rogues I'm an honest woman," she replied. "I'll have my dues and not a farthing over." And with that she quickly counted out what the captain had owed us. For good measure, I grabbed the oilskin packet, and we made for the door. Soon we were at the back of the inn, where it was now quite dark. And as we moved quickly away, we heard our unwelcome visitors entering through the front door and running through the house. It was obvious that they had no respect for our property. Two hours later, having left my mother with friends, I was seated in front of a roaring fire at the hall, for it was here that I found the doctor in the company of Squire Trelawney. On hearing my story, they had immediately sent a body of men to the inn, and now they wanted details of the day's events. "You say the captain mentioned Flint," said Dr. Livesey. "He was a rogue, to be sure." "A rogue, eh?" remarked the squire. "He was more than that. The bloodthirstiest buccaneer that ever sailed, I tell you. The Spaniards were terrified of him. With me own eyes I've seen his topsails off Trinidad, and the cowardly son of a rumpuncheon I sailed with put back, sir, into port of Spain." At that moment there was a knock upon the door, and in strode one of the squire's gamekeepers.
Begging your pardon, sir, but we're all back from the Admiral Benbow, and a fine mess it's in, too. The tables are upturned, the windows broken. Confounded, sir. It's not the state of the place we care about, but the rogues who caused it. What of them? They made away, Squire, when they heard us coming. Got down to the beach and escaped in a lugger that was standing by. All of them except one. And who was that? An old blind man. He staggered out into the road and fell on the hooves of one of the horses. Didn't have a chance. He was killed outright. So Blind Pew was dead. Another death so soon. But this time I felt no sorrow, only relief that this wretched creature could no longer bother me, for he'd been the most frightening man I'd ever set eyes on. As to the inn, Squire, it's in a dreadful mess, but nothing taken, it seems. Even upstairs there's money left lying around the dead captain, but it seems they didn't want it. If it wasn't the money, then what in heaven's name were they after? Perhaps they were after this, I said, and took out the oilskin package I'd taken from the chest. Quickly the squire opened it. It contained a book and a sealed packet. The book contained dates, scribbled notes, and amounts of money interspersed with place names or entries of latitude and longitude. Do you realize what this is? As a matter of fact, I don't, replied the doctor. It's as clear as noonday. This is the scoundrel's account book. It lists the names and numbers of ships plundered, the dates and positions. Quick, let's see the other. With care, the doctor opened the seals on the package and then took from it a folded parchment. He opened it and laid it on the table. We could none of us speak now for excitement, for here was a map, carefully drawn, with latitude and longitude, soundings, and the names of hills and bays and inlets. This was undoubtedly the prize that Blind Pew had sought in vain, for on one part of the map, in a small neat hand, were the words, "Bulk of treasure here." What a find! And look here, more directions on the back as to the whereabouts of the treasure. Oh, Livesey, you'll give up your wretched practice at once. Tomorrow I start for Bristol, and within days we'll have the best ship and crew in England. Hawkins shall come as cabin boy, you Livesey as ship's doctor, and I'll be admiral. With favourable winds and a quick passage, we'll soon be there, and have the treasure for ourselves.